The snow was falling hard that night, the kind of snow that turns the world quiet. The roads were already buried under thick white blankets, and the wind howled through the empty countryside. It was one of those nights when even the bravest stayed inside, except for Margaret Lewis. Margaret, a 72-year-old widow, lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a forest in Vermont. Her husband, James, had passed away 5 winters ago, and since then, the quiet had become her closest companion. Her children were scattered across the country, busy with their own families, their own lives. Margaret didn't blame them. Life moves on. But sometimes, when the snow fell like this, she missed the sound of another heartbeat in her home. That night, she sat by the fire, knitting a scarf for her granddaughter, when she suddenly heard something strange, a faint cry, distant but desperate. At first, she thought the wind was playing tricks on her. But then it came again. It wasn't the wind. She set her knitting aside, grabbed her coat and boots, and stepped outside. The cold hit her face like 1,000 needles, but she didn't care. She followed the sound, down the narrow road, past the old oak tree, until she saw it. A white SUV was half buried in snow by the roadside, its headlights dimmed and one door slightly open. Inside, she could make out shapes, people. Without a second thought, Margaret trudged through the snow and knocked on the window. Inside were a young couple, David and Sarah Miller, and their 2 children, Emma, 8, and Noah, 4. Their faces were pale, their lips trembling. The car had broken down 3 hours ago, and their phone had died. They were on their way to visit Sarah's parents for Christmas, but they'd taken a wrong turn in the storm. They had no idea where they were. Margaret quickly realized the danger. "You'll freeze to death out here," she said firmly. "Come with me, my house is just down the road." David hesitated. He didn't know this woman. In the darkness, he could barely see her face, just her outline against the storm. But Sarah looked at their children and made the decision for him. "Please, help us," she whispered. Margaret smiled softly. "Come on, then. Let's get you warm." It took them nearly 20 minutes to reach Margaret's house. By the time they got inside, everyone was shivering uncontrollably. Margaret immediately started a fire, then wrapped each child in blankets that smelled faintly of lavender and home. She poured them hot cocoa, real cocoa, made from milk, sugar, and a dash of cinnamon, and watched color return to their cheeks. "Thank you," Sarah murmured, her voice breaking. "We didn't think anyone lived out here." "Oh, I've been here longer than the snow itself," Margaret chuckled, setting a kettle on the stove. "You're safe now. We'll call for help in the morning." For the first time in hours, the Millers breathed easily. The warmth of the small cabin wrapped around them like a hug. The children soon began to smile again, playing with Margaret's old cat, Oliver, who purred like he hadn't had company in years. As the night deepened, the wind roared outside, but inside, the crackle of the fire filled the silence. Sarah helped Margaret prepare some soup, and David tried to get the car radio working with the old batteries Margaret kept in a drawer. They laughed when nothing worked, and somehow, the laughter felt like a gift. When the children finally fell asleep on the couch, Margaret noticed Sarah staring at the fire, lost in thought. "You look worried, dear," she said gently. Sarah sighed. "It's been a hard year," she admitted. "David lost his job 2 months ago, and I've been trying to keep everything together. We thought this trip to my parents might give us a break, a fresh start. But then this happened, and I don't know how much more we can take." Margaret sat beside her. "Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it," she said quietly. "But kindness always finds its way back. Always." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Sarah looked at her and saw not just a stranger, but a woman who understood, who had known love, loss, and the long road between. The next morning, the world was blindingly white. Snow covered everything, trees, fences, even the old mailbox outside. David tried to dig out the SUV, but it was hopeless. The nearest tow service wouldn't come until the storm cleared. They were stuck there for at least 2 more days. Margaret didn't seem to mind. "Well," she said, clapping her hands, "looks like we'll have to make the best of it." And they did. Margaret cooked biscuits and scrambled eggs while Sarah set the table. David brought in firewood from the porch, and the children helped decorate Margaret's little Christmas tree with buttons and yarn ornaments. By afternoon, the small cabin had turned into a scene from a storybook, warm, bright, and full of laughter. That night, they all sat together, telling stories. Margaret spoke about her late husband, James, how they'd met in the summer of 1971, how they'd danced to Otis Redding under the stars, how he'd built this house with his own hands. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke, though tears glistened at the corners. "You must miss him terribly," Sarah said softly. "Every day," Margaret replied. "But he's still here, you know, in every nail, every wall, every snowstorm that passes by this house. He'd be happy knowing I wasn't alone tonight." The room fell silent, filled with something gentle and sacred. Even the fire seemed to burn softer. On the 3rd day, the storm finally stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, and the road began to clear. David managed to get help from a nearby mechanic, who towed their SUV to town. The Millers would be leaving that afternoon. Sarah helped Margaret wash the breakfast dishes, her hands trembling. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "If you hadn't come for us." Margaret smiled. "You'd have done the same for me." David came in from the porch, carrying his coat. "We'll come back to visit," he said. "We mean it." "I'd like that," Margaret said, though she knew people said such things all the time. Still, her heart felt lighter. Before leaving, Emma ran up and hugged her. "You're like my grandma now," the little girl said. "Can we send you letters?" Margaret's eyes welled up. "I'd love that, sweetheart." And then they were gone, leaving tire tracks on the melting snow and a silence that felt different this time. Not empty. Just waiting. Weeks passed. Margaret returned to her quiet life, tending her small garden, knitting scarves, watching the snow melt into spring. Sometimes she thought of the Millers and wondered if they ever really made it home. Then one morning, as she went to check her mailbox, she found an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Mrs. Lewis. We made it home safely, thanks to you. You'll never know how much your kindness meant to us. That night changed something in me, in all of us. You reminded us what goodness looks like, what it feels like. David found a new job last month, and we've started volunteering at a shelter. Every time we help someone, I think of you. Love. Sarah, David, Emma, and Noah." Margaret held the letter to her chest, tears falling freely. That would have been enough, the letter, the memory, the love. But the story wasn't over. 2 months later, a knock came at her door. When Margaret opened it, she froze. It was the Millers, all 4 of them, standing on her porch, smiling. Behind them was a moving truck. Sarah's eyes were shining. "We bought the old house down the road," she said. "We wanted to be closer to you, if that's all right." For a long moment, Margaret couldn't speak. Then she stepped forward and pulled Sarah into her arms. "Oh, child," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to." Sarah smiled through tears. "We wanted to. You helped us when we had nothing. Now it's our turn." The children ran past them, laughing, chasing Oliver the cat. David shook Margaret's hand. "We meant it when we said you changed our lives." Margaret looked at them, this young family who had stumbled into her life on a frozen night, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, home. Not just the house, but the feeling of belonging. That winter, they spent Christmas together, the Millers and Margaret. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of baking bread, and the sound of music. Emma hung a handmade ornament on the tree, a small wooden heart with the words, "Our Family," carved into it. When midnight came, snow began to fall again, soft and peaceful. Margaret looked out the window, watching the flakes dance under the lamplight. David stood beside her and said, "Funny, isn't it? The snowstorm that almost ended us gave us you." Margaret smiled. Kindness has a way of finding its way back home. Outside, the world was quiet again, but this time, Margaret wasn't alone.